In this video, we are going deep diving. We're getting shrunk down and we're talking about Ant-Man, Quantumania. This guy down here, Mr. Family Man, has seen the movie. Dre and I have not, but he's got some thoughts and some theories in regards to what it means for the parks. We're also going to talk some box office, a ton of stuff today on OG 55. Welcome aboard to another episode of OG 55. Today, we're talking all about Ant-Man, Marvel. We're also going to dip into the parks in relation to this Ant-Man thing. We have a lot to discuss. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce my fantastic panel. We got Vash Guy, host of the Freshly Squeezed show here on the channel. Welcome back, producer Dre. How are you today, sir?
Doing pretty well. I am super excited to get into this conversation because we've heard a lot of chatter about this film. But I mean, listen, nothing concrete, nothing as reliable as George. So I want to go ahead and suss out fact from fiction. So I think this is going to be fun. But if anybody wants to follow me, you can go and do so right down there at Vash Sky. Just go ahead and type that in. It should pop up for all the, as Christine Waysons McCarthy would say, for all the
robust
discussion right there. And if you guys want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, where we have some amazing shows, both in the works and on a regular basis, right? We have Orange Nerd, Story Geeks with Jay, Citrus Corner, the original flavor of Orange Grove 55, and my own Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice and news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Perfect. And down below, we got Disney Family Man 23 doing Family Man things. He's the host of our Citrus Corner, a show here on the channel, which focuses on the cruise lines and Walt Disney World. George, thank you, brother, for coming back on. If you could let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media.
Absolutely. And again, it's glad to be back on with my brothers. It's always a good time.
Yes.
But you can find me on my YouTube channel, Disney Family Man 23. You can interact with me on Twitter at Disney George. You can check out the new podcast I'm part of called A Walk with Walt. And of course, you can find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
Pay attention, It's Joe time.
There we go. Without further ado, let's dive into the micro realm of Ant-Man.
Now your adventure through inner space has begun.
There we go. So, George,
Yes.
you saw Quantumania recently.
I did. I saw it yesterday, and it was a 2:20 early matinee showing. And I have to say, for it being a Friday, and I do know people are still working and kids are still in school, what have you, but for it being a Marvel movie that has not stopped them before, I got to tell you, there was only about 10 people in the theater.
That's not good. That is not good. Now, I want to preface a little bit before we really start diving into this that George will be going into spoilers for Quantumania. So if you haven't seen it and you care about spoilers for this movie, you might want to dip out and come back after you watch it. But George, what is your overall thoughts, musings, positives, negatives, just everything on your mind in regards to this movie?
So anytime that I go into a film, whether it is an anticipated blockbuster hit or whether it's an indie film, I usually never pay attention to anybody saying, well, we're anticipating this, we're anticipating that, because you're already going in with the mindset, oh, this movie's going to downright suck, or this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I usually go in there with a blank canvas, and then I paint my own predictions and thoughts and opinions on that after I finish it. So for Ant-Man, I usually don't have too much of high expectations. It's a great set of films, but I mean, it's nothing like compared to, as you had mentioned, OG before the show, The Winter Soldier or Endgame or Infinity War. It's not to that level, of course. But what intrigued me the most to actually go see this in theaters and not wait for Disney Plus is a lot of the times the headlines were mentioning that this is going to be the start of Marvel moving forward with Phase 5. Right. And there's crucial elements within this movie that are going to be significant moving forward.
Yeah, there are characters that kind of lay the foundation for stuff coming up. Okay.
Yes. So that's what intrigued me more. Not necessarily the storyline for Quantumania, but it's just that notion by itself. But I thought, I'm the family man. Let's take the family out. Let's go see a movie in theaters. Why not? And
real quick, George, before you move on.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that this movie is really more setup than it is about an individual Ant-Man movie, which is interesting because that was one of the big complaints about Phase 4 of the MCU was that it felt a little directionless. It seems like this one, at least credit where it's due, it seems like there is a little bit more of a direction where they're setting it up a little bit more. But continue. That was just a thing that I kind of noticed with this one. From not just you, I'm hearing that a lot, that this is really setting up the phase, right?
And you're absolutely correct. I think that's where a lot of the storyline lacks between the last two Ant-Man films, because they are pushing this notion that there's a new villain in town. And I will get to that in a little bit, but my wife Jess and my son Josh enjoyed it immensely, but they don't necessarily go into the intertwinings of a film where you break it down and everything. If it's a good movie to them, it's a good movie. Where I have to say, compared to a lot of the backlash that this film is getting, I can understand why it got the B rating that it did. But it was an okay film compared to the Multiverse of Madness, Love and Thunder. And I have to say it, I'm sorry, folks, even for Wakanda Forever. It's the one thing that it was a fast-paced film that it kept it flowing, where when you go back to Multiverse of Madness, Wakanda Forever, the storyline drags in the very beginning, and then you get that boom, that final battle at the end, and then it's like, boom, the movie's done. With Quantumania, you get a nice steady flow of action tied with the comedy and everything. So that I can appreciate.
Good pacing, and yeah, I had heard that this film is like better than Marvel's recent slate, right? And I think that's a universal, or at least somewhat of a universal opinion across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, to get into some of the things that were cringy and unnecessary and downright hidden messages of certain types of hidden agendas are still being showcased in Marvel. For instance, and again, folks, spoiler alert. So if you don't want to know, click off, come back later, what have you. But if you've followed us so far, then TFB. So anyway, at the very beginning of the film, Paul Rudd's daughter in the film, Cassie, gets arrested and for a protest that was done in a park for the homeless. Well, okay, so, and they have to showcase as why she got arrested, and she's kind of going back and forth with her dad saying, this was a peaceful protest, and what is the homeless to do, yada yada yada. Okay, so that was pretty much at the very beginning of the film, and I'm like, okay, whether or not you agree with that or not, is that something that was necessary, so to speak? I don't believe so.
Well, it is San Francisco.
Yes, of course.
Just saying.
Yes.
But
yeah. And then the second cringeworthy thing was when they were done in the quantum realm, Michael Douglas was explaining to his family of how he created these worker ants, and they build a community empire together, and he mentions the term socialism.
He sure does.
And that clicked in my head. It was like, whoa, okay. It was like kind of showcasing the notion that socialism is okay and would work out in this type of, so. And again, I'm not knocking it either way, whatever your political thoughts are on. I just feel like it shouldn't be a headliner for a Marvel film. We're all going in there for entertainment, for kick-ass, action-packed. We don't care about what's going on in the real world. Stop bringing it into our fantasy films, so to speak. And
Right.
that just came out really wrong. I don't mean those kind of fantasy films, folks, just saying.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is
Well,
interesting. Go ahead, Jared.
It's supposed to be escapism, right? So when you have these things kind of take you out of that for just a little bit, it can take you out of the picture. And so that has been my criticism throughout this whole thing. It's not necessarily politics one way or another. It's that when you have them at all, now I'm not quite in the MCU anymore. Now I'm kind of back in real life, and so that's kind of been my big issue. OG, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that and I might be I'm admittedly a half glass full kind of guy. But I think a lot of the political messaging that we're seeing in a lot of content right now is a product of 2, 3, and 4 years ago. I've been saying that consistently. I think that Ant-Man, Proud Family, all this stuff is stuff that was really birthed and worked on years ago at the height of all this, right? I think that we will start to see a pulling back of that kind of stuff going forward. I think that Hollywood in general is trending a little bit in the opposite direction. We see it with David Zaslav, with Warner Brothers. We're seeing it even, I think, with Bob Iger. I think that they're recognizing that this kind of stuff is a little divisive, and no matter what side of the aisle you're on, it doesn't really matter. I think that we're going to start seeing this sort of pull back. Now, look, Hollywood has always been progressive. It's always leaned Democrat. If conservatives think that Disney, there's a chance that it's going to be like this full bore conservative. No, it's not going to happen. No. Disney's never been like that, even long before Bob Iger. So that's not going to happen. But I do believe in the years to come, we're going to see just a less aggressive stance with this stuff. It's going to be a little more balanced, a little less political going forward. And again, maybe I'm just being overly Pollyanna-ish about that, but I really do believe that the trend is kind of, the pendulum is swinging a little bit. Go ahead, Dre.
There are definitely executives who want to take things in a little bit newer direction, right?
Yeah.
And they're definitely creatives who want things to stay the same or accelerate further in their direction. So there's going to be a friction here, and it's going to be interesting to see how Hollywood can kind of balance this kind of stuff out as we go in the preceding days. The internal polling that Drew Taylor from The Wrap actually just mentioned, right? Disney's losing out in 2 big categories in terms of demographics: young families with young kids because of exorbitant pricing, but 2, people over 50 because of the politics, right? Disney knows that they have a problem with this, and you hear Bob Iger talk about accountability and so forth, and how it's like we're going to be holding these people accountable in terms of how these things perform. Part of that equation is, well, what do you feature, right? What do you feature in your films that might turn people away? So I think there's going to be a little bit of a tug and pull here. We'll see, how much or how truthful that is, how aggressive Bob Iger is, and how much it actually comes to fruition. So it's going to be very, very interesting. George, please, you apologize. Please continue.
No, absolutely. And then kind of moving forward to some of the threats that are encompassing this film. One in particular that could have been an interesting character to utilize, and the execution was not done well, and that is with MODOK. And just the overall aesthetic look of him was kind of cringeworthy just to even look at. As OG had mentioned prior to recording, he kind of had that Krang look from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was more as a comedic based villain rather than it be an actual threat. And spoiler alert here, folks, that MODOK is actually the first villain in the very first Ant-Man. And when he was supposedly destroyed and got sent into the quantum realm, that he was disfigured and what have you. And the next villain that I will be talking about later kind of gave him this kind of armor suit type thing to kind of keep him going. But the comedy was quite nice, as it being for like Ant-Man. But as I said, for MODOK, I kind of wanted him to have this kind of like gringy type of attitude, what have you. And he ends up kind of turning his way at the end and actually helping Scott out. And which ends up to his death. And right before him dying, he looks Scott in the face, and you have this awkward moment that you have this gigantic head laying on the ground, and he's talking to Paul Rudd, and he said, "I've always taken you like a brother." And he like pats him on the cheek and says, "I'm so glad that before I die, I finally became an Avenger." Okay. And then he croaks. That was, I think, the most cringiest scene I think I've ever seen, not even just in a Marvel film, but in just cinema in general.
Well,
Because what they're doing is they took a villain that was from the first Ant-Man that basically put him into vain, because then he became good at the very end and had this in his mind that, oh, from him helping Scott, he became an official Avenger. And he took him as his brother, which he never took as his brother. And he changed good, all because Cassie called him a dick.
Well, and here's the thing. This reminds me of like they're trying to go full Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker with this, like the disfigured bad guy, right? And he gets that redemption arc at the end. And then they even play into the whole family thing, like, I'm your father. Oh, you're my brother. It just reeks of wannabe Darth Vader to me. I don't know. I got to see it to kind of really... but that's what it sounds like from the description. What do you think, Dre?
Well, I heard a lot of people were disappointed with MODOK and how he was depicted in this, and the humor kind of undermined his character a little bit, right? And the connection to the original Ant-Man villain was a little bit strange for them, and so forth. There are story beats in this film that allude to characters having different versions of themselves. If I'm not mistaken, I haven't seen the film, but I've heard, pray tell, that there are different versions of, like, for example, Kane, right, the lead villain. Do you think that applies to MODOK? Do you think they're, like, I don't know, testing the concept of this villain or something? Maybe we get him back in some other alternative form, or you think this is just it and might be a waste of a character?
I think, honestly, based off of what I've seen as the character through, I think it's pretty much a one and done. It's very possible that they can revitalize the character in a new way, especially because, like, with the multiverse and what have you, and Marvel has that type of way of doing that. But it's going to have to be something different than what they did with his character in Quantumania. That is the most cringeworthy character I think I've ever seen.
Like you said, OG, bad execution.
Bad execution. And from what I'm seeing, I haven't seen the movie, but from what I'm seeing, the little clips and what have you, the CGI for him looks really, really bad. And this seems to be a trend really with Marvel lately. And maybe it's because we heard a lot of controversy around Marvel and the pay for some of these artists and the working conditions for some of these artists. But I don't know, ever since maybe Multiverse of Madness, the CGI has been real rough, y'all. I mean, it's been like cringeworthy. And the clips I've seen of MODOK and some of the stuff with Ant-Man doesn't look good. Like, what's going on with that?
And for far too much money too. That's the real interesting part. Now, they did use in this film, and I'll applaud them for using this. They did use what was coined as the volume, right? And that was the kind of surround LED screen that they used for Mandalorian's production.
Oh, like that stagecraft kind of thing that they were using.
Right. Where it's like you have this kind of real-time CGI background, and or models or whatever, and that casts light on the actors in a very realistic way, and that's how you get some of those amazing shots in, like, The Mandalorian, for example, where they don't have to do post VFX work a lot of times. It's just like it's on set basically, which is really really cool. They utilize that technology here, which I thought was a good use of it, because this is a completely CGI environment, and you have lights reflecting on actors and so forth, and you're cutting down on costs vis-a-vis that method, which is great. But again, I've heard that the production budget is still very, very high. $200+ million or so. I have to actually look at the budget now that I think about it. But I've heard it's very, very expensive, and the CGI still isn't at the level I think we all expect from Marvel after having seen some amazing films in the canon, Infinity War, Endgame, and so forth like that. So it's a little discouraging that they're still having problems and that the costs still are as high as they are. That might lean into another discussion we're going to have a little bit later, but just so you guys know, yeah, it was expensive.
Well, and the thing too is like, at least with Multiverse of Madness, the CGI was total dog shit in that movie. I mean, it was really embarrassing, but at least it had Wanda. So I can kind of forgive them for it, right? But with this one, they don't have any, like, I don't know. There's not much motivation for me. That's why I'm like, I haven't even seen it yet. And we're going to, George, just talk spoilers and same with Dre, like, we don't really have any desire to even see this thing, you know? I mean, I'll check it out on Disney Plus for sure, but I'm not going to pay astronomical AMC movie ticket prices to go see this because I'm not interested. Now, George, you're different because you have a family and you have not
absolutely
outing with a family. That's great. But I mean, I'm not gonna see it. Now, if she was in it, maybe.
Gotta love Wanda.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't know. We'll see, you know. But George, continue. I'm sorry, brother.
Yeah, no, you're good. So to kind of get into some positive notes of the film, I do love the father-daughter relationship chemistry that Scott and Cassie has that moved forward along between like the three films, especially like within the first one of how he was a criminal because he wanted to somewhat impress his daughter even at 6 years old, and then kind of moving forward her as a teenager. And so that bond between the two of them throughout the film, I do feel like that was done very nicely. Now, coming to the main threat of this film, and actually this character arc is what kind of drove me to see this film in theaters. And we are talking about Kang. This character, the way that they presented this character, it's almost like that they drained every type of character synopsis out of the other characters and just like put it all into him, because it's like he had so much backstory to him that you don't know about, but you want to know. And that's what continues on the story. It's like, who is this guy? What is his purpose? What is his meaning? Because he throws in some things that if you have to actually listen out and catch, and it's like, well, what did he mean by that? And you start to learn that as the story progresses. Kang started out at the very end of Loki season 1 as the character that they titled He Who Remains. And that's what kind of left Loki season 1 on a cliffhanger. And now here he is in the quantum realm. So the whole backstory is while Janet Pym was stuck in the quantum realm, she meets Kang, befriends him, helps him to kind of rebuild his ship, which is like the core centric energy of how he is to escape. Well, she then learns that he was not in the quantum realm by osmosis. He was put there purposely. He was outcasted, for which they didn't disclose of who outcasted him in the first place. And so she learned the true, real image of him, which was a monster. And so that's where you kind of have that protagonist, antagonist kind of going back and forth. And at the very end, you find out who put Kang in the quantum realm was Kang. It was other versions of him, because despite him being a untrustworthy villain in this film, he was actually somewhat of the good Kang, because he wanted to get out, because he knows something big and drastic is going to happen. And because he was, that version of Kang was destroyed in the film, the other Kangs can now move along with their ultimate plot, which that was one of the secret endings, was you see a whole bunch of Kangs, for which that's what kind of threw me off, was because they had a Kang dressed as an Egyptian king. You had another Kang dressed up like a professor. You had another Kang. That kind of threw me off, Key, because you have this great character arc of a villain, and then you're going to spoil it at the very end by kind of diluting him, so to speak, by making him have all these weird janky costumes on, so that kind of threw me off. But the character itself of Kang was one of the most interesting characters, especially when it proclaims to a villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe moving thus far. And aside from that, then I'll move into what I feel like about the parks. But what do you fellas think so far as the character of Kang himself?
I've heard I heard his character and the actor who plays him is the best part of the movie. I've heard really, really good stuff about him, which is good because this phase really hinges on Kang, Kang Dynasty. And I mean, they need to stick the landing with this character. And I think, George, you said that they kind of took all resources and put him into Kang. Probably why. There's a lot riding on this character. So it is encouraging to hear that at least they got him right. So that's good news because they need him to be right. He is the next Thanos, so to speak. So that's good to hear. What do you think, Dre?
It's kind of a interesting twist, right? He's apparently he's trying to get out for what do you want to call it? For what is it? Good reasons, right? In order to stop some calamity or something like that. But I'll give them credit on the twist. That's a very interesting concept right there. It's a little bit risky because do you undermine your protagonist's plight, right? Where it's like, I mean, they if they just went along with Kang and allow him to do what he was going to do, does he stop future bad things from happening? It's an interesting idea. I'll have to see how the MCU actually attacks that issue. That's gonna be very, very interesting. I've heard Kang is the best part of this movie. I've heard that. Do you think? Because I've heard this argument that Kang was at all undermined in this film in a way that maybe didn't set expectations in some way going forward. That is to say, how Thanos was always that kind of person in the shadows, right? And they built him up for a while, and then when he makes his on-screen appearance, I mean, you're ready for him, and it's like you take him seriously. I have heard that criticism levied against Kang, where you show him in some particular lights that let's say don't make him out to be as big of a threat as I think the MCU wants him to feel. Did you get that feeling, George? Or
yes, because based off of the original trailers of how they presented him, they made him seem like he was going to be a much bigger threat within the film itself, where it showcases that to a certain degree, but then by the very end, it turns out that he was a villain by omission. That it's because that he had to, not because that he wanted to fight the good, but it was because of somebody that got in his way from completing his task, because he had told Scott that destruction is coming. This is something that is even bigger than what has been beyond for the past in the MCU universe.
Sure.
But yes, it kind of like fell short in that aspect. Once you kind of get the full storyline of what is to come, I feel like that point is where Kang is going to showcase the notion of how big even Thanos was, which is actually going to move me into my predictions of really what should be done with Avengers Campus, because we all know, we talked about it on this channel many times, Avengers Campus is kind of a half-ass project, so to speak. I hate to say that,
mediocre.
It really is. It needs more. Needs more bulk. It does have I feel anyways, it has more potential than Galaxy's Edge at this point, because at least with Avengers Campus, you still have some light breathing in there. You have the Spider-Man stunt show, you have Wakanda, you still have Doctor Strange and everything. So there's more potential there, but they need something to kind of withhold people in that land for long periods of time. And so at the very end of this film, it mentioned Kang will return, which obviously we know he's coming back. And then there's the second little secret ending where it shows Loki watching another version of Kang, and it looks like they're back in a time frame like the 1920s, like early 1900s, that Loki was following Kang, and then that's where it cuts. So this tells me that Kang is now going to continue in Loki season 2. On top of Avengers, the Kang Dynasty, and Avengers, the Secret Wars, that it was confirmed that Kang is going to be in both of those films, along possibly with Loki season 2. So this character is going to be around for quite some time. That's going to have a major threat, and it's not disclosed as of what it is. And I think that's more of the interesting tale of that. It's like Steven Spielberg's Jaws. It's like you didn't see the shark, but you knew the threat was there, and that was more of the haunting aspect of it, where it kind of goes that same tone where you know this character is up to no good, but really what is his final ending to everything. So me personally, when they made the notion of they're going to have King Thanos and it's a different in the different realm of everything for the Avengers e-ticket, I'm sorry. I do think Thanos is a great villain, great character, but I think we are so far past him that unfortunately that the attraction was not made during the time of Infinity War and Endgame, that I feel like fans, particularly the diehard Marvel fans, is kind of lost interest in Thanos now that the spotlight is on Kang. I really think that they should showcase Kang as the threat of the e-ticket attraction.
That's interesting.
And whether or not they keep the same ride vehicle or what have you, but I think that they should kind of diverge away from Thanos and make it about Kang, because then you have something that would drive people to actually go into this attraction, but it also showcase the films that are going to be coming out that's going to have Kang in them.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now, this is the dilemma though that Disney's in with the Avengers Campus, because the MCU has so much content, which they're going to pull back on that. That's a whole other story. But the MCU has so much content, and the storyline is moving so rapidly that really anything you put in there is going to be outdated really by the time even Kang might be outdated by the time this thing opens, So it's like, it's a real dilemma that they're in, where it's like, these attractions take so long to build and the MCU moves so fast. It's always going to be kind of behind.
But now I wonder if by them cutting back on the Marvel content,
right,
kind of keeping it in limbo, if that will kind of sustain the character's presence much longer than they did with Thanos.
That's true. That's true. Go ahead, Dre.
It's interesting because, with the hardcore Marvel fans, I agree. Maybe Kang, I think it might be worth looking into. But then, we all know that so many people visit Disney parks, right? And you kind of want to bring them a character that is most significant to the widest range of guests possible. I can see why they stuck with Thanos and provided a different version of him, at least, so as to make him as compelling and as interesting as you possibly can, given his outings in Infinity War and Endgame. But it is an interesting argument. Who do you go with? And I think that's the question with all the Marvel projects, right? As it relates to Avengers Campus, both here and abroad, it's like, what direction do you go in? Because there's so many directions in which to go.
I think that's where Star Wars went wrong, because it was always Kylo Ren. No matter where you turn with the Star Cruiser, Kylo Ren, Rise of the Resistance, Kylo Ren,
kidnapping you. Every storyline is Kylo Ren kidnapping you. And, and that was actually part of the brilliance, I thought, when they announced that multiverse concept at D23. I thought that was actually a brilliant concept, because that gives Disney, the creatives, permission to constantly, you can really, with the multiverse concept, you can throw anybody in there. Whatever the villain of the week is, you can kind of throw in there. So that's another interesting point with this concept, is like, you can start off with King Thanos, but because it's a multiverse attraction and because it's going to be mostly screen-based, I assume, you can then throw Kang in there. And then whatever the villain of the week is in 10 years, you can throw that villain in there. So it does kind of lend itself to that flexibility. But again, we've heard from our source, dude, trust me, bro, that when Bob Iger came back, he kind of put all of the Bob Chapek era stuff on hold and sort of ordered a reset. So are we even getting the multiverse version? Are we going to go back to the Quinjet version of this attraction, or are we going to get something totally new? So that's a whole nother thing. I don't know. Well,
and I think it would be interesting if they still stuck with the multiverse concept, because Kang does mention it quite a bit in this film. So you would have something heavily to rely on. And as you have fellas had mentioned, that we don't even know what is to be the aspect of these next two Avenger films. Does Kang end up somewhat bringing Thanos back, or anything of that nature, where you can utilize that with the multiverse, where if you just stick to just one stabled storyline of what Star Wars did, it's so hard to break, where then that's where it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that you would want maximum versatility and flexibility with whatever you do with Marvel in the parks going forward, right? So your attraction would probably lean pretty heavily into the multiverse, if only to bring out whatever characters that you want at any time, whether they be for synergistic purposes, promotional purposes, relevance, whatever. It's going to be fascinating to see where they go, because I think they understand, Star Wars may be too attached to the timeline, right? Maybe it's, variety is the spice of life, and obviously there wasn't much variety to that. Whereas Marvel, I think they're thinking in a totally different direction for that, which is good. It's just where they land. That's kind of my big question, because you can go in a billion different directions, whether it be within Avengers Campus or a future expansion, including Hollywood Lands. So that's a very kind of interesting thing there.
Yeah, both lands have their own set of problems, but I actually think the problem with Avengers Campus is actually more significant than Galaxy's Edge in terms of like fixability, right? Because with Galaxy's Edge, it's a fairly inexpensive fix. All you gotta do is just have Darth Vader walk in there, or have some OG original trilogy characters walk in there and do some meet and greets. You immediately change the energy of the whole land, right?
Yeah.
Pretty inexpensive fixes for Galaxy's Edge, because the meat and potatoes, the foundation of that land looks fantastic. Now you just got to fill it in with some soul and some heart and soul, right? So add maybe a musical roaming band, some Darth Vader, you're good to go. But Avengers Campus, I think, has a problem of more. It's not, the land itself is underwhelming. So it's more costly to fix it, because and
it's also the location where it resides in.
It's tight.
Yeah. It's problem of scale, problem of attractions, things to do. Yeah, there's a lot
much more expensive fixes. Yes, they have the entertainment. Yes, they got the cool characters, but the problem with the land is more like you need a big ride. Okay, that's a few $1,000,000 at least, right? You need to kind of enhance the look of the land a little bit, plus add to it. Those are expensive fixes compared to what Galaxy's Edge needs.
Right. But I mean, you are talking about one of their hottest properties, right? Yeah. So it's less of a pill to swallow, let's say. And the potential for upside is there. But yeah, you're right, OG. I mean, you're going to have to do a lot more. And that's an issue. I think Dusty, when he was doing his live stream the couple weeks ago, he walked past Avengers Campus like, oh, look, it's the land that we never go into. And that's kind of a big issue, right? There's no compelling reason in which some of the regulars to walk into, whereas Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, I've heard of it as like a good pathway to Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run or Rise of the Resistance, but not really a compelling reason to stay. So that's a very kind of interesting.
I mean, to be fair, in my personal opinion, for how big of a franchise Marvel and Star Wars are in their own way, I think both lands are completely underwhelming for different reasons.
Right, that's exactly it.
Like I go into Galaxy's Edge to ride Rise and Smuggler's Run. Mm-hmm. That's it. After that, I leave the land. There's nothing that'll keep me there. Avengers Campus, I use it as a walking path to get over to Mission Breakout or over to Carsland for Radiator Springs Racers. It's like,
Yeah.
and it's a shame that you have these two big purchases that Iger had envisioned, and they're just being subdued to this minimalist type of walking path, so to speak.
I will say this though, Avengers Campus. I mean, and look, this is totally anecdotal. I mean, this is totally just an observation. It's usually pretty packed in there, and a part of that is the size of the land. I get that; it's pretty small, but it seems pretty popular with the normies. But again, how many of those people are there for the land or just walking through to get to something else? So that's impossible to really gauge. But from the busyness, it seems pretty popular. I mean, I'm underwhelmed by how it looks. I'm underwhelmed by the offerings, but the normies seem to be enjoying it, at least from anecdotally observational, right?
I think you'd have to look at sales, and you'd have to look at how many people are actually walking. What is it? Taking part in the attractions and so forth. Yeah, there are ways to gauge it, but from us outside looking in, I will admit it's difficult, but I think everybody will agree that there's got to be more to do, and it's got to be bigger. Yeah. It's Marvel sets a certain expectation, and it just doesn't rise up to that level. Whereas Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, there needs to be more happening in it. So it's an interesting couple of things going on here. Should we talk about how the bigger stories is related to Quantumania and the Marvel MCU in general?
Before we do, my last comment, as I said, overall, it was an okay film. It wasn't, my expectations for it was not high. It's an okay film based off of the last several Marvel movies that I've seen, particularly Thor: Love and Thunder, which is to me the worst Marvel movie I think that was ever created.
How do you think the humor was in this film?
The humor I felt like was just enough. Okay. And especially with Paul Rudd, it fit that way. And again, with the last two films, it kind of already started out with that type of sarcasm and comedy, what have you. But when you take something like with Chris Hemsworth as Thor, as the god of thunder, and it's like, then you kind of throw that type of comedy into it, if that's even what you want to call it. That was, Lord. I don't even have words for that.
I am not a fan of that Ragnarok cornball, almost like it's a parody of itself kind of humor. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. So I've never seen Love and Thunder. I probably won't, to be honest with you, because of that element. Ant-Man humor, though, is much more my speed. I think some of the Ant-Man stuff is really, really funny. It's more clever humor. It's not cringy parody like humor like the Thor movies are. So I'm more interested in the comedy with Ant-Man. So
and
that's
the Ant-Man stuff never took itself too seriously, so it can kind of get away with some stuff that maybe Thor couldn't, for instance. But 1 to 10 scale, George, any final thoughts?
I would have to actually rate it a 5.5. And the reason why it even gets that is because of Kang.
Okay,
and
that's what I'm hearing.
Holds that film up. If Kang was not part of it with his story arc, just by the story alone, I'd have to give it a 3.5.
Okay,
so that's rough. That's rough, dude. I mean, a 5 is pretty rough. So I mean, think about it. A 5 is basically 50%. So if you were in school and you did it, and you did an exam and you got 50%, how would you feel about it? Like, it's not a good score necessarily, right? So yeah. All right.
And that might spell trouble here as we go forward. So Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania's Supersizing to 100 million 3-day, 115 million 4-day box office Saturday update. This is by Anthony D'Alessandro from Deadline, and it basically goes on to go over the performance of Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania. To me, it's kind of interesting because this film I think it was expected to do maybe 280 million. on its opening weekend. That's worldwide, by the way. And then that was adjusted down to, I think, like 230 or something like that. I think that's how low it got. I don't know. I mean, when you dig into the numbers and so forth, they're not super impressive, and that might spell trouble for a couple of reasons. One, because it's got a B cinema score now, which doesn't necessarily indicate outstanding legs. But two, we have to remember that Marvel films, they're very, very front loaded in their box office, right? These aren't things that you can see this trajectory here as it compares to films like Top Gun Maverick and Avatar: Way of Water, films that have outstanding legs, and then compared to the Marvel films, and that trajectory doesn't necessarily stay like this. It usually it comes out really, really high, really, really strong, and flattens out and levels out pretty quickly. So I just kind of wonder how well this film will actually perform, given that the opening weekend was supposed to be a little bit bigger. It's not bad, especially in this era that we live in, but it's a little bit meddling, due to the fact that it's a Marvel film, and people they usually have more compulsion.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it legs out and what kind of legs it has. Here's the thing, I don't really know. I don't really know, because a lot of bad movies make a lot of money. So, look at the Transformers franchise. Those movies are dog shit. And they, except for Bumblebee, that was actually good. But most of the Transformers movies are really bad. And those movies make a ton of money. Will that happen here? I don't know. I'm not going to make that prediction. But it's not impossible that it depends on the competition that's out there at the time. Also, I want to share something too, which is interesting. I'm a big fan of Christian Harloff.
Please.
Been a big fan of Harloff for years, but basically, for those at home that are not familiar with him, he does a lot of like nerd content, right? So he does a lot of like Marvel, a lot of Star Wars reviews for that. This is his wheelhouse. So his audience is very much in this world, the sweaties, right? No, this is not scientific at all. This was just a YouTube poll he did in his community tab. Sure. And this was, I believe it was yesterday. I don't know what where it's at now. So it might have changed, but 5 hours in, it says here, Ant-Man 3. This is 5 hours into his poll. Ant-Man 3 is the second ever rotten MCU film on Rotten Tomatoes. Will the rotten score keep you out of the theater to see it? 27% said yes, but 73% of his audience said no. Now, the reason why this is significant is because the nerds that would flock to these kind of films, that's his core. Like here on OG55, we're theme parks, right? We do a lot of movie stuff and film stuff too, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But we have a big theme park audience. For Harloff, he has a big nerd audience with film and streaming, so that's interesting. And again, this is not scientific. There's nothing, but it's interesting to me that his audience is like, well, yeah, it sucks, but we're still going to see it. I thought that was interesting.
I think this poll points to the general distrust that people have for some of the critics as aggregated by Rotten Tomatoes, right? There have been some films that have come out that they don't that the critics don't like, but the audience does, and that's partially reflected actually in the score as it exists in Rotten Tomatoes today, right? We saw a big disparity between your critic score and your audience score. Also too, with this, you have to consider Christian Harloff's audience, right? These are going to be fans of the franchise themselves. They're not going to be swayed either way. What critics say, unless everybody says it's dog crap. But this is kind of different from the people responding to this poll. This is kind of different from the people like the normies, right? Who would usually very much support a Marvel film. I think that's what distinguished Marvel from, let's say, the DC universe, for example, right? You had a lot of nerds going to DC films, but not necessarily a lot of normies going to DC films, and that's what kept them back. Whereas Marvel, it was cross appeal. It really had a lot of buy-in from a lot of different demos, and I think word of mouth, I think, will hurt this film. I don't think the critics necessarily have to do anything. I mean, obviously it'll hurt it somewhat, but I think the bigger problem is word of mouth on this one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because next weekend, like you said, Dre, and you're absolutely right. Marvel movies don't. They're very front loaded, right? Because of spoiler culture and all that. So yeah, we're gonna expect a big drop just being a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Here's my thing. If the movie does a 55 to 60% drop in that general range next weekend, we're good. I think we're very good at that point. If the closer you get to 70% though, if it starts to, 66, 67, 68% drop, the movie's in trouble. That's kind of where I'm at with it right now with that drop next weekend.
Yeah, and then you have to, the cinema score. I don't put a lot of stock in this because, as you said, OG before the show, so many films are given A's, right? I think Attack of the Clones was given an A, but I kind of liken it to California food ratings, right? For restaurants, the health department will come in there. Oh, just give everybody an A. So when you see a B, it's like, oh, whoa, I'm not going to go in there because there are so many A's in which to choose from. George, are you getting the kind of same feeling we are about this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. With a B rating restaurant, stay away from the tomatoes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly.
But yes, I do agree. I feel that with Marvel, and I think it's because also just the Marvel logo. When you just hear it's a Marvel movie, everybody wants to go and see it, regardless of what the critics say, what your neighbors say, what any type of review online says. It's like you have to see it. But then when you have the majority that goes and see it all at once, and then they're posting their reviews, and it's like, this movie sucks, this movie is nothing, this movie's this and that, then it starts to kind of dwindle little by little. And then, but as OG had pointed out, that if it's anything above a 70% drop, then it's pretty much whatever the movie made opening weekend, that's pretty much their number.
Right. Yeah. The second weekend's going to tell all. Dre, I mean, you're right. I mean, the word of mouth is going to hurt it. It's just now a matter of how much. Will it perform like a Transformers movie where the movie's dog shit, but people still go? Or will people say, hey, you know what? I'm not hearing good things. I'll wait.
I honestly feel like that's going to be the case, because if you look at the other two Ant-Man films, they did respectfully good, but I mean, they weren't huge. They weren't huge compared to like the other Marvel films.
Yeah.
What's the competition look like in the next few weeks? Do we know what?
I was just going to say that the competition is kind of like, it's not super, it's not like a dense time for movie releases, let's say, right? And so that might extend it out. Also, too, I was doing some last minute research here and looking at the budgets. It looks like it is about 200 million, right? I'm sure there are some out there who might connect some dots and might suggest that it is further up there, but it doesn't have to make necessarily a lot of money in order to make a profit. 600, 800 million or so. So
and that's doable.
I think it's doable, especially with the international market. International market could love it. That's the thing. That's the kind of unknown with Marvel films. You put this out in wide, you can get some interesting results. China could really take to it, for example, and so forth. So it's the story's not written. It just doesn't look the best coming out the gate. I'll just say that. But this is an interesting thing. We've had a lot of middling Marvel projects recently, and the Hollywood Reporter is reporting that there might be a slowdown on that end. This is how much is too much Marvel and Star Wars, Disney rethinks franchise output, as Disney chief Bob Iger pledges to be, quote, better at curating releases. Fiscal discipline may impact an expansive Disney Plus original slate. This is by Aaron Couch and Boris Kitt, February 16th. So this, relatively recently. Says this: the The directive to rein in costs and output arrives as Disney prepares to release Marvel's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania on February 17th, and as The Mandalorian Season 3 awaits its March 1st Disney Plus debut. Marvel is Disney's most important supplier of product, the subsidiary with the highest output, and under Iger's directive, it could feel cuts the soonest. Quote, there's going to be a level of rigor on Marvel and across the entire company, one company insider says. Numbers matter now, and costs are going to be outlined and enforced. And it goes on to say this. In what feels like a different timeline ago, at July's San Diego Comic-Con, Marvel chief Kevin Feige put the pedal to the metal when he outlined 5 Disney Plus shows for 2023. What If Season 2, Echo Loki Season 2, Ironheart and Agatha, Coven of Chaos. Now, sources tell The Hollywood Reporter that Loki Season 2 and Samuel L. Jackson's led Secret Invasion are the only sure bets to debut this year. Even projects that wrapped months ago, such as Hawkeye spinoff Echo and Wakanda Forever spinoff Ironheart, are unlikely to arrive in 2023 as the studio spreads out its content and tinkers in post-production. And shows in development, such as Nova, are now on a slower path. This is them kind of reining things in here, and it tells you just how much that is. As a point of comparison, during its Phase 4, Marvel Studios released a breakneck 18 projects across theatrical and streaming, 4 films and 5 TV shows in 2021, 3 films and 3 TV shows in 2022, plus a few specials. The studio released just 11 projects from Phase 3, which ran from 2016 to 2019. So that's a big delta right there. Mm-hmm. And that might be why they're kind of pulling back on this a little bit.
And this is a smart move, I think. I mean, I'm much more of a quality over quantity kind of guy. If you know, instead of 5 Marvel things a year, if we only get 2, but those 2 things are like just off the charts good, it's worth the trade-off, right? Kevin Feige is a brilliant guy. But he's just a guy. He's one person. And I feel like with all these projects, especially with the adding, the D+ stuff on his plate, I feel like he's been spread a little too thin. And I think that's partly why we're seeing this quality kind of dip with the Marvel universe. Also, look, and I don't want to come off like I'm disparaging her, and I don't really know for sure. Obviously, I don't work at Marvel, right? But ever since Victoria Alonso has sort of taken on more responsibility at the studio, I feel like that's also kind of been the start of a lot of that quality dip. And again, I don't know much about her, and this is kind of circumstantial evidence for sure. But Dre, have you sort of noticed that as well? Like since she got elevated, I see like things have kind of been like this. I'm like, well, and look, it might be because Feige has been spread too thin to not be hands-on as much. So maybe she's taking the reins. Maybe that's kind of showing a little bit.
We heard some, let's say, some stories with Victoria Alonso as it relates to the production of Multiverse of Madness, for example. We heard that she really pushed for America Chavez, and she wanted to depict a Chavez in a certain way. Didn't test well at all. They were forced to go back and reshoot some stuff, which ballooned the budget of that film and so forth. And so we've heard that Victoria, as attempting to be set up as the next Kevin Feige to take over, just hasn't been all that successful. And I think that might be part of the quality dip. You have to kind of, you got 18 projects here. People are being spread out way too thin. And it's really difficult to maintain quality at that level. What did we see with Star Wars when they tried to go really aggressive with the release slate? Right. It just kind of fell off. The wheels fell off the wagon at a certain point, right? And I think that might have gotten the best of Marvel as well. It's just too much of a good thing might be bad. George, are we off base here, or do you agree?
No, I feel like I'm a big person to say that, stuff doesn't happen as a coincidence. So like when you make one little alter change in something and then you start to see a significant change or a drop in a negative sort of way, then that's where you kind of have to kind of look at the perspective, okay, where did that change start and who did it begin with? And and as OG said, it's kind of hard to depict of whether or not that was the issue or not, because I don't really know Victoria, personally, but it seems like she has like some hidden things there that trying to get into the Marvel franchise that I don't think it's Victoria's secret. what have you. But it's,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
but
and we
I
don't
do
know
agree with
anything
you
about.
guys.
I mean, we're not in the room, so it's like, and that's why I really want to make it clear. Like, I'm not like disparaging her. I'm not saying definitively it's her fault at all. I'm just saying circumstantial evidence shows
That's
that
the way it comes across.
right. She was elevated, and then all of a sudden, the stuff started to do like this. It's hard not to connect dots, So it'll be interesting to see how that whole thing pans out. But quality over quantity is definitely the right move. It's interesting because they're ramping down Marvel quite a bit, but then I think like Star Wars, I think they need to ramp up a little bit. Like, it's ridiculous. We haven't gotten a Star Wars movie since Rise of Skywalker, and quite honestly, I don't trust any of these Star Wars movie announcements, because every time Lucasfilm announces anything, it's like, okay, well, there's a big asterisk at the end of it, because is this a project that's actually going to happen? Like, Patty Jenkins made that whole little skit about how excited she was to do Rogue Squadron and yada, yada, yada. And this is a dream of hers and yada, yada, yada. And then the film got canned. And that's just one example. We've seen this over and over and over. Benioff and Weiss's projects were all canceled. I mean,
Ryan
it's
Johnson
over and over.
trilogy.
Ryan Johnson trilogy. It's just nonstop. So people are like, oh, well, in April, they're going to announce a new Star Wars movie. And it's like, yeah, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars more than Marvel, to be quite honest with you. But how can I get excited about a new Star Wars project? They can announce the coolest thing in the world. Is it ever going to happen? I don't trust it anymore. That's a bad place to be with fans.
And the Hollywood Reporter actually answers a little bit of that, and maybe there's a little bit of spin here as well, but they say this: Star Wars is facing the opposite challenge, as you astutely pointed out, OG. After being absent from the big screen since 2019 and having had false starts with Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron, which may never materialize, it won't. Disney has ramped up its efforts to return the franchise to theaters. Damon Lindelof led a writer's room in July to hash out a story for a feature. I don't think that's happening either, to be honest. And Taika Waititi is still developing his own take on the franchise. From what I understand, not a word scrolled onto a page yet for a script, but we'll see. Disney is expected to unveil film plans at Star Wars Celebration, set for April in London. On top of Season 3 of Mandalorian, shows are expected to hit the streaming service this year, which include Ahsoka, starring Rosario Dawson, and John Watts-produced Skeleton Crew. Quote, Lucasfilm may ramp up, but it will have to abide by the same fiscal discipline as the rest of the company, says an insider, which, by the way, not necessarily a bad thing, as Indiana Jones 5 it cascades over the 300 million mark in terms of investment. Costs got to be reined in, guys. I mean, this is ridiculous. Come on. But you need a theatrical production.
No, you do. And this is going to be tough for Kathleen Kennedy, because Kathleen Kennedy is the queen of just like, hey, 80% of the movie, we're going to switch directors. Okay, that's expensive. And if she thinks in this new era of accountability that Bob Iger has emphasized that she's going to be allowed to do that kind of stuff, I'm telling you, we're hearing rumors, strong rumors, that she's leaving after Indy.
Yeah, it's
probably a good idea, Kathleen, because from the history, she's been spending money like a drunk sailor over there, Now with Marvel, it worries me a little bit because not with Kevin Feige. I trust Kevin Feige a whole lot more. The issue is that we have seen a dip in quality with the CGI big time. We talked about it a little bit ago with Ant-Man. If you're going to start reining in the cost, I hope that doesn't take even a bigger hit.
But isn't that even what's going on within the parks? It's like everything that you see in the film industry, it's actually mirroring what the parks are even doing. It's like they give this elaborate concept pieces of saying, oh, well, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that. And then it never ends up happening. And then the thing that we do get, it's like a D grade compared to what they initially first announced. And then that's when the quality drops. And I actually just got done before the show watching our Mr. Vash Sky on WDW Pro. Excellent conversation between the two of them. And Pro had even mentioned the notion with Tiana's Bayou Adventure is that, he has like relatively really close contact with people who have worked on is working on the project, and it's not up to the budget that it should be to compare to what they're actually removing.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's going on with the film industry.
Well, that's what worries me, because Disney has to be smart. I mean, look, obviously you have to rein cost in. Obviously, like Indy 5 being 350 million is too much. Ridiculous. So you definitely have to rein that in, but you have to be smart about how you rein it in. You can't just go in there and kind of just slice and dice, And look, it does seem like Bob Iger does seem to understand that, because even when it comes to the parks, like George mentioned, we're seeing them ramp up the housekeeping stuff at the hotel, so they're putting more cost in. So it seems like they know like that was an area like we can't cut from, right? I see there is some kind of intelligence there where they understand that, but it's really risky. And when I'm seeing Marvel with their CGI declining by degrees, like big time, it worries me that they're going to take even more money away from them. What's that going to look like?
Well, I mean. Yeah, that is a very big risk. I think one of the things that could help a lot, though, is just a reduction of output overall. Yeah. So that way you can kind of hone in resources for things that really, really matter and require some of those bigger budgets. It's just it's less is more sometimes, right? Yeah. Quantity over quality, as we've said before. But if you can contain costs on a studio in its entirety, and part of that being reduction of output, when there's more resources to go around for other for productions that mandate it. But we're seeing all kinds of changes right now. Not only are we seeing a reduction of output by some, an increase in output in others, but we're seeing a kind of modifications to the actual slate. Same writer. This time, The Marvels zooms to November, Haunted Mansion going in late July release dates. So this basically outlines, and we heard the news yesterday actually, that they're taking The Marvels, which was going to be released in July, and putting it into November. And then you're taking Haunted Mansion, that was, I believe, was going to be released in August, if I'm not mistaken, and you're putting that in the July slot that The Marvels had. That's a really kind of interesting thing, because early November hasn't been like a barn burner in terms of big action films like this. Usually you want them a little bit closer to Thanksgiving, but you can't obviously have that, because then you get into a problem where you have Wish coming out in its slate, so you kind of have to give it a little bit of space. However, right after The Marvels comes out in November, you have and Hunger Games actually coming out, which is targeting the same exact demographic that The Marvels is. Then you have Trolls 3 after that. It's going to be a competitive slate here. It's really interesting that they would actually make this move, and especially so relatively late in the game.
Well,
I mean, I know.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Finish.
Well, no, I bring up. I think in the DMs when we were having conversations about this, I brought up marketing, and one of the retorts was, well, they haven't put out that much, but it's like, yeah, but you've you've probably bought a whole bunch of marketing material in which to put in theaters, in which to put in this, in which to put in that, and now you have to alter all those. So it's to do this so late is very, very unusual, let's say. Go ahead, George.
Well, and to your point of not even just it being late, is you're taking a Marvel film, which it doesn't surprise me that if they would want to move it to November as a strategy to kind of space things out, I can understand it. But you're trading it with a film that we don't know really anything about. The promotional for the Haunted Mansion, really the only little bit of detail that I have ever got of the film at the D23 Expo was we did get to see one teaser trailer, and they brought out Jamie Lee Curtis out on the stage that she's playing Madame Leota. That is it. So to kind of bang for everything, to put a film that no one knows really anything about and moving it to a summer, like an earlier summer.
Yeah, you have to step up your marketing efforts and promotion.
Correct.
Efforts.
Yeah, and then they're trading it with a Marvel film. So that really even gives you a tall tale of how they even feel how the Marvels are going to produce at the box office.
Do they have full faith in this, or do they feel that the July 28th slot, which is much more valuable than the early November slot, is maybe they feel that they like Haunted Mansion better? I'm not sure. Oh gee, what could possibly cause this to happen?
it's interesting. I kind of have a little bit of a different perspective on this.
Sure.
I want to preface this by saying I have zero desire to see the Marvels. I don't like Captain Marvel.
Same.
I made no bones about no bones about that. I did not like that movie. I had no interest in Miss Marvel. This movie is not it's really not my thing, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. There is an audience for it. That's cool. I respect that, but it's just not for me. I don't want to see it, you know. But I don't necessarily. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, it's a demotion to go from summer to November." I don't necessarily think so. I think that the times are kind of changing with that. I think November, December, holiday season has become big for movies. You see a lot Star Wars, Avatar, these kind of big tentpoles kind of now being released around this holiday season. That, you know, the argument can be made. Yes, it has competition in November, but it's going to have a lot of competition right in the middle of summer too. You know, and the reason why it has a lot of competition in November is because November is a good month for movies. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad. It doesn't really necessarily mean the movie, they don't have faith in it. In my opinion, that could be the case. In my opinion, I think this is just more strategic. They're trying to maybe space this stuff out. Maybe the movie needs more work in the CGR department or something. Who knows? I think that's probably more what's going on here than like, oh, the movie sucks, we're going to just tank it. In my opinion.
Well, the record for the Veterans Day holiday weekend in November was, I think, $181 million set by Wakanda Forever. And there's a reason why that was the record. It's because, you know, it's just, it historically has just been unprofitable. And even that film wasn't as profitable as I think the studio was expecting. Was that because of that area in time? I'm not quite sure, but it just historically has not been that profitable. I agree with you, OG, and that is changing for sure. But is the Marvels going to change it? I don't know. I think this was a better summer film, but I think it's clear that the perceptions around maybe Haunted Mansion or the Marvels itself, from the studio's perspective, that's changed given the change in slate. This slate in.
Could there possibly be? Oh, sorry, OG.
Oh, real quick, I just want to say, I wonder too if it has to do with budget. Now, I don't know the budget for the Marvels. I don't know the budget for Haunted Mansion. Is it possible? Because you bring up a good point, Dre, that like the movies generally in November, there's been hit movies in that time period, but they don't necessarily make as much. Is it possible the Marvels has a smaller budget than Haunted Mansion, and Haunted Mansion really needs to perform a little more than this one? So that's
literally what I was just going to say. I wonder if it's the opposite. I wonder if they're not really relying on the Marvels needing to be in the summer July spot, but more for the Haunted Mansion. Maybe they just don't really have too much reliability for the Haunted Mansion because there wasn't a whole lot of promotional for this film aside from what was only shown at the D23 Expo, and you're going to end up throwing this. And I know in time it'll show more previews and what have you, but I wonder if they have a lack of faith in the Haunted Mansion to move it up in the July spot where there's other films that can carry it through. That would be more of a headliner.
Maybe this is, that's a possibility, a very distinct possibility. Or maybe this is just them spreading out the slate. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 comes out in the summer as well. Maybe they just want a little bit of space between these Marvel products in order to make them feel as special as maybe they felt back in the good old days, let's say, right? It could just be that. I don't know. This is just very weird. We're seeing a lot of weird stuff here. And clearly Disney, I think, feels that there may be issues with Marvel and for Star Wars, and that they're changing course and tact. We'll see if it actually pays off. This is just a very, very interesting move, especially, Hunger Games. It's the same demo. Women who want to see characters on screen and will bring their boyfriends. Hunger Games, the Marvels. So it's going to be quite fascinating. And what does that mean for Wish? I don't know.
Yeah. It is interesting. We'll have to see. And again, I got to reiterate, I got no interest in this movie. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of Brie Larson. It's probably why I won't see the new Fast and Furious movie.
I don't know, but I think honestly, the Marvels, I think this is going to be her most breathtaking, spectacular acting career that she's ever had. Ask her; she'll tell you. You know, so it's,
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Right. There you go. I mean, it's
yeah. I have no desire to see the Marvels.
I have
Whether
no
it came out
interest.
in July, November, December, August, whatever. I have no. I never even seen any of the pre-shows that led up for the Marvels. It's like I have no desire to no.
No, it doesn't interest me at all. And I look, there's a lot of people out there that like this character, they like these characters, and that's great. Enjoy it. It's just for us, it's just not our thing, and that's okay too. So
I think Captain Marvel benefited from the release slate, right? I mean, it was following one of the biggest hits ever in the form of Infinity War.
Right.
Obviously, it was set up in the post-credits scene for that movie, right? And then right before Endgame. So I think it benefited beautifully from that, but that doesn't necessarily indicate how popular or how well regarded that character is up until you make it a franchise, and which they're doing here. We'll see how it pays off. But a lot of people didn't see Miss Marvel. A lot of people, do they remember Monica Rambeau from Wanda? I don't know. We'll see. Go ahead, George.
I mean, I basically wanted to go see that film just so I could see the inside of a Blockbuster again. So
right? Yeah, exactly. It's interesting too, and look. The problem too is that Brie Larson's a very controversial figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
People love her and people don't like her. Mm-hmm. The problem with having her connected to a movie, and this goes for Fast and Furious too. I'm really surprised Universal went down that road, to be honest with you, because the thing is that once you have her in these movies, now she's doing the talk show circuit,
mm-hmm.
and that opens it up to comments that are gonna go viral for all the wrong reasons.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And that's an issue when you have her in these movies. And it's an issue for the Marvels for sure. She's going to get on Jimmy Kimmel. Who knows what she's going to say? With Fast X, she'll get on Jimmy Kimmel. Who knows what she'll say? And it's just like, and that taints, we talk a lot about accountability, right? With these movies. And we talk a lot about appealing to the most people possible in this new era. And she's kind of a product of the bygone era that we're kind of moving past. It's very, and I just don't know how that's going to play, and we'll have to wait and see, I guess.
I don't know what I don't quite know what the thought process was of bringing her into the Fast series. It seems so antithetical to at least, the aura that Brie Larson gives off.
It's such a toxic male franchise.
Yes.
And then you put Brie Larson in the middle of that. I'm like, what is happening right now?
and honestly, I may be in the minority here, but do we really need another Fast movie? It's like,
they make money. It's just how much money is this going to make? It's $340 million in terms of budget. Now, I have heavily criticized Kathleen Kennedy for what they're doing with Indiana Jones. I will levy the same criticism against, Comcast and Universal, what they're doing with the Fast series in budgeting that high a picture. That's a lot of money you got to make, and let's just be honest, the Fast series hasn't produced all that much in terms of a box office. The amount at which you have to make for a $340 million picture since Fast 7, I think. So,
and that's really was driven by Paul Walker and his recent passing. Mm-hmm. They don't really have another, thank God, but they don't have another thing like that where it's going to push people, I think that was the only one that made $1 billion worldwide. And this movie with a $350 million budget is going to have to do close to $1 billion.
Yeah. I think there's like another that made $1 billion, but it's just, you're going to have to make a lot of money. And it's out of 10 films to only have a couple go even closer over that $1 billion mark. And you're budgeting this 340, which means that you'll have to make 1.2 just to break even.
Right.
That's a lot. That's quite a bit. But I levy the same criticism against Indiana Jones. That
Oh yeah.
it's just exploding. Kathleen, what happened? Like what? Why is it
Like
that
I'm
these things
excited
are...
I'm excited for Indy, but I'm also worried for it.
Oh,
Yeah, me
absolutely.
too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, me too.
And I guess director has made some comments again lately. Oh, go ahead, OG. Sorry.
Oh no, actually I haven't heard those. What comments was Mangold making?
I don't know. He's had a very adversarial tone, and I guess they've been making waves with some parts of some communities, let's say. But again, it's like, why are we getting into this? Why are we saying things? Why are we? It's all very strange. This is a $300+ million film. We've heard that it's maybe $350 million because of exchange rates. When it comes to Europe and its production at Pinewood, you're gonna need everybody on your side here. Let's not push people away. Let's not make the same mistake again.
And it's frustrating too because Mangold is a really, really, really talented guy. Like I've only seen a few movies from him, but the few movies that I have seen have been really good. I absolutely loved Ford v Ferrari. I thought that was a fantastic movie. I'm not even into racing. I could give a shit about NASCAR, car racing, none of that. I don't care at all. And I was riveted. I was glued to the screen watching this film. It really is fantastic. Logan, another great movie from Mangold. The guy has chops. Just stay off of social media. Just ignore. I don't know. Ignore as much as you can all the noise and just focus on the work. And if the movie's good, it'll speak for itself. Now, I do understand that there has to be sometimes some of these rumors when some content creators have huge followings, right? Massive followings. So there does have to be a little bit of like damage control here. Like if the rumor really is false and the studio feels like this rumor is catching fire and it's doing damage to the film's prospects, then maybe you step in and sort of debunk that. But you do that very far and few between. You do that very sparingly, and you do it with all the respect in the world. You don't go and disparage these content creators. You don't go and call them names. You do what you have to do. You say, this is false. You'll see when the movie premieres. Leave it at that. You don't get into the mud with people, though. When you get into the mud with people on Twitter and what have you, nobody comes out looking good. Nobody. You know?
I now kind of remember what those comments were. I was trying to find the article where I saw them, but I can't find it right now. But I guess he was saying that Indy was going to be reimagined somewhat.
Okay.
And he...
For a modern audience?
That was the intimation there. He was going to be at a different point in his life and so forth. And we talked about this, OG. I said, people just want to see Andy doing indie things. That's what they want. Obviously, he's going to be at a different place in his life, clearly. But you know, it's throwing that fedora back on and getting into it. Not like, oh man, I'm not the person I used to be. I'm not this. I'm not that. We're too old for this kind of thing. You know, we've seen this kind of recharacterization of characters. Let's say Luke Skywalker from Last Jedi. I think a lot of people didn't necessarily like that interpretation of Luke. And from what I understand, this gave people a lot of those kind of vibes, right? And it was just like, why are we bringing down our characters all the time? Why can't they just be who they are? That's why I think Maverick worked so well, is because he was still doing Maverick things when we looked on him, from the first one to the second one.
Right.
I know he's like a test pilot, but he's still doing the thing, right? And
there was still the acknowledgement of like he's passing the baton on.
Yes,
getting older, but he was still.
It's done with respect.
Maverick. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And this is interesting what Mangold is saying too, because it kind of like contradicts what Harrison Ford was saying. What they were really cutting back, like the old age jokes.
Old age jokes, yeah.
Right. And then Mangold is here saying like, oh, we're going to reimagine him, which we're assuming would be he's going to be this old man kind of thing. And that's interesting. That's very, very interesting. I wonder how this is going to be. I mean, maybe they reimagine him in other ways. I don't know. I mean, that's equally as concerning though.
Right. It's just hearing stuff that's been coming out of the production, hearing stuff that's been coming out of interviews, and the little tidbits that we've been hearing, they haven't been encouraging. This film may be amazing. I'm not saying that it's not.
Right.
It's just it hasn't been it hasn't been as exciting as I think it should be. I mean, this is probably Indy's last hurrah here. Let's come out swinging. Let's have him go off on a big win. Just not hearing or seeing that. So it's going to be interesting, and there's a lot writing on this.
Yeah. Now the one thing working for it that the sequel trilogy had working against it is that this movie, Dial of Destiny, is coming off of Crystal Skull, which was
low bar.
I mean, everyone hates that. Pretty much everyone hates that movie. So it's like, can it top the low bar movie? Okay, and maybe not too difficult. Star Wars had a whole different kind of expectation, because technically, yes, it was following the prequels, but in the Star Wars timeline, it was really following the original trilogy. So the expectations were that of comparing it to the original trilogy, which is like, you're going to compare the new films to this masterpiece of a trilogy. Ugh, that's a real hard thing to kind of top. So I think in terms of the expectations game, Indy sort of has a little bit of an advantage, but even still, this is, like you said, Dre, this is Harrison Ford's last hurrah as Indy for sure.
And he confirmed that. And he confirmed that at the expo.
Yeah,
Harrison Ford.
Exactly. I'm gonna share your screen, Dre.
Yeah, I guess this is the origination of some of those comments. Dial of Destiny director James Mangold explains how time has changed in Indiana Jones. Quote, "We can't hide from where we are in our lives, neither can Indiana Jones," Mangold says. His need to find ingenious ways out of problems increases. Trying to see here. Okay, he says this: "We can't hide from where we are in our lives. None of us can, and neither can Indiana Jones," says Mangold in a spoiler-free interview conducted for last week's Hollywood Reporter cover story on Ford, where a few of the below comments previously appeared. Quote, "I wanted to follow Harrison's own lead and simply deal with it straight on. It's not just a movie about a hero in his twilight years who is called back into action. It's more than just that his bones might ache. It's that his soul might ache, or that some of his optimism or sense fitting into the world might have evaporated. The mistake you can make in movies, and we've all seen movies like this, is where someone is of a ripe age, but the entire movie is continuing this charade along with them that they're not that old."
To be honest, it does kind of sound a little bit like the Luke Skywalker of the sequel trilogy.
Doesn't it?
It does, and we'll see. We'll see. Execution.
I don't want to depress Indy. I just want.
Yeah.
Look, has the world changed around him? Absolutely. We have to acknowledge that, right? It's not the 1930s anymore. We get it, and so some of that is a natural evolution. But to put so much emphasis on it, especially before this film actually comes out, do we want a kind of burnt out Logan type figure, or do we want somebody who I don't know, is fun? These are supposed to be fun,
right. And the interesting thing too is that we know that we're getting a young Indy in this movie, right?
Sure.
So I wonder, because Luke, when we had Luke in the sequel trilogy, we didn't get a young Luke as part of that equation.
That's
it was all the
true.
Old Luke. So I
you have
wonder,
a juxtaposition of styles there,
right? So maybe this, and it could work, it might not, but maybe because we're going to see like this old, down and beaten Indy, but also pretty heavily, I think, this young Indy that we know from the original films, kind of offsetting that. Is that going to make a difference? It might not. But imagine if you had the sequel trilogy, but you had a bunch of scenes in those films of like the Luke that we saw in Book of Boba Fett when he was training Grogu and things like that. Would that have changed the perception of the sequel trilogy to have that young version of Luke in his prime juxtaposed with the sequel trilogy version? Would that have helped it? Maybe, maybe not. But that's kind of what we're seeing here with Indy. So that'll be interesting to watch.
It will be. Does a depressed Maverick work? I don't think so. I don't think it does. But Mangold might have a kind of vision for this, and maybe you're right, OG. Maybe it is a juxtaposition of styles, and maybe, I don't know, maybe he has to find himself again. I'm not sure. It's just,
We'll find
It's
out
all
June
makes
30th.
me very nervous. This is a $350 million film. This is one of the most expensive films of all time. Go ahead,
Yeah.
George.
No, I was just gonna say we'll find out June 30th.
I know we will.
I mean,
We'll
because
find out.
this film has been on again, off again for how many years now? When it was originally supposed to come out,
Yeah.
where Spielberg was spearheading the director's chair. Like that's how long that it was going through. It
It's
was
just
like
been, again, Kathleen Kennedy production
Right.
issues, push back,
Right.
and that's the thing. She's a producer. Like this is her main job, and still we get production issues. We get budgets going over. We get subpar films even after we spent all the money.
And that worries
need to
me.
change.
And that worries me. And I don't mean to compare Indiana Jones to Disney Pixar's The Good Dinosaur,
Yeah.
but just the way that it goes, that's how it ended up. They had to change directors, change storyline for The Good Dinosaur. So by the time it actually came out, the movie tanked.
Wow.
It
And,
did.
and that's what I don't want for Indiana, especially Indiana Jones. Like,
Oh, of course.
for a 2014 Pixar film, you can kind of take it or leave it. But when you have an iconic character
Yeah.
that spearheaded cinema back in the 1980s, and it's like then you have this old, beaten down, raggedy type of a shell of a man. It's like, yeah, I paid $30 to see this. No, I didn't.
Yeah. And this the bigger question is, we saw from that other Hollywood Reporter article suggesting that there might be a film slate coming with Lucasfilm, with Star Wars Celebration in April. Do you think that's still the case when we know that Kathleen Kennedy might be on her way out? Do you think that's something that Disney should pursue? Because I mean, in my opinion, I would just wait until she leaves, and then that way you're giving somebody who steps into the role a clean slate.
Well, yeah, and the only way I would really support that announcement is if they already know who's replacing her, and that person is behind the scenes picking the slate.
On board with the project.
Oh my
going
gosh,
forward.
what if that's the
Right.
announcement at Star Wars Celebration? They're kicking
Oh.
Kathleen Kennedy out.
That would bring the house down. I'm telling you, if they do that, and then Jon Favreau comes on and says, "Hey, I'm running a Lucasfilm," that would bring the house down. They don't have to do anything else. They don't have to announce any shows, any movies, anything. Just do that, and it would bring the house down.
It would. It's just
Unlikely.
Hollywood doesn't do that, right?
Yeah,
they're
right.
gonna champion Kathleen Kennedy. They're gonna say, "Oh, she's the best producer of all time."
Right,
She's-
right.
They just don't embarrass people like that.
You'd be trotting her out there, and it would make her look bad as the crowd
Yes.
does this standing ovation as she's leaving. It would just be a bad look.
It'd be a bad look.
I mean,
but-
I mean, she's not Chapek, so I
Right,
mean,
right.
it's like
It's pretty close though in Star Wars community.
I tell you what, though, if they were to announce her retirement before Star Wars Celebration, and maybe a replacement for her, and that person
do it
walks
very
on
subtly.
stage,
Do it very subtly.
yeah,
my
that
word.
would be it. That would make a big response, I would think. But
Yeah.
things need to change. I think things need to change in Marvel. Need to change in Lucasfilm. They are acknowledging that somewhat, but I think the bigger, more substantial changes we've yet to see.
Yeah. Interesting. Fascinating conversation, fellas. Thank you so much for coming on again. Oh, man, a lot. We dove into a lot today. Ant-Man, Indy, the parks, all of it. Dre, if you could let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Best place to find me is going to be at Vash Guy. It's right down there. Just go ahead, type it in as it's spelled right there. Should pop up for all the, as Christine Waysons McCarthy would say, for all the
Robust.
discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55. We have some amazing shows coming up, guys. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you want to get notified for this, because I mean, hey, we just had an amazing video that premiered yesterday on the interview that I had along with Theme Park Wizard with Christopher Lenertz, which OG and myself were able to commentate over. Fascinating discussion. If you guys love Wondrous Journeys like we do, and you want to learn more about that, that is definitely mandatory viewing. So definitely do that. But if you want more content like that, hit the subscribe button and comment down below on what's on what you think about all of this. But if you want to see me, it's going to be in the channel you're watching right now, and where you can find my show, Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Yeah, that interview that you and Wizard did with Christopher Lerner, too. By the way, at home, those of you who are not familiar with Christopher, he's the composer and songwriter for Wondrous Journeys. Check out that video. He really impressed me. I just gotta say that this guy understands Disney in a big way. So if you have some time, check it out. I think you'll be very, very pleased, and very, very pleased to know that he is Disney's kind of got him working on some other stuff too. So
oh yes. And if you want to learn what that might be, you gotta go to the video.
Check it out. And down below, we got the family, man. We got Mr. Balls to the Wall, host of our Walt Disney World show here on the channel, which is Citrus Corner, where they dive into Walt Disney World and the cruise lines. George, if you can let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media.
Absolutely. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Disney Family Man 23. You can interact with me on Twitter at Disney George. You could also find me on the new podcast, A Walk with Walt. And of course, got to say the best for last, my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
It's been an honor serving with you all.
You're good.
Quick
It
drop
worked out
It was a nice little backdrop to that.
Right? But well, thank you all so much for watching. Comment down below with all your opinions on everything we talked about. Indy, Kathleen Kennedy, Ant-Man, box office, the Marvels, everything we talked about. We would love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for all the support over the years with OG 55. We do appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Talk to y'all later.